Hi, my name is Charles Key. I've represented House District 90 since 1986. The purpose of this production is not to make any political statements. The purpose of this production is to give the simple truth to the American people about what happened April 19th, 1995.
Ask them a question, what happened or whatever. They said, look, the genesis of the Oklahoma City bombing was a fake sting operation that was begun to be put together right after Waco.
Oklahoma City is probably much like the town you live in. We're not really famous for anything. We're just people like you and your neighbors. But all that changed at 9:02 a.m. on April 19th, 1995.
McVeigh was probably working with them, and that was a fake sting operation, not a failed one, a fake one to make them look good, just like they were saying.
We are joined today by Charles Key, former state representative in Oklahoma and possibly one of the few politicians who I'd say sacrificed his career trying to discover the truth about one of the most important events in American history. How are you doing today, Charles?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for coming on. And I really wanted to bring you on because I'm late to the game of Oklahoma City bombing. And it's not a game, it's something very real, but it was 30 years ago. I was busy. I was in the Army. I didn't really think about it. And I just read whatever was, out in the newspapers. I wasn't local to Oklahoma City, so I didn't have any other deeper information. Just whatever was fed. And I was like, okay, some crazy GI did this and this and this. I was a GI. I know there's crazy GIs. And I went for it. Well, fast forward many years later, I'm doing a show called America's Untold Stories. And the author sent me this book, Blowback. This is by Margaret Roberts. And I was thinking, I hadn't thought about it that much, but, maybe my audience would be interested in the subject. And well, it's kind of taken over my life. It's become a complete obsession. I talked to Margaret first off, and then I also want to recommend another book, Shadows of Conspiracy by Kathy Sanders, who I also spoke with. They're almost two bookends. And of course, today, Charles, you have a massive, massive tome called The Final Report on the bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah building, April 1995. Now, what I really appreciate about you is this is going back to the beginning. Am I correct to say that you were involved with the first documentary on the bombing itself in 1995?
Yes, I was. By the way, I kind of forgot about that. It was a local man that created a documentary right off the bat. And I wish I would have maybe done some things differently regarding this. Not a big deal, but yes, it was called What Really Happened, the Oklahoma City bombing. That was the very first one that was done, I believe.
Hi, my name is Charles Key. I've represented House District 90 since 1986. The purpose of this production is not to make any political statements. The purpose of this production is to give the simple truth to the American people about what happened April 19th, 1995.
And it was tied in, I believe, with your report. But now, I think that same documentary, because I have some articles the time pissed off Frank Keating, the governor of your state. Did that put you on the bad end of things when you were trying to put together your team and build a grand jury? Can you go into that process?
Well, there's a lot of interviews I've done, and there's probably a number of them on the internet, but the reason that I got involved, the thing that really got my attention was it was really organic, what happened and what we did. It was a reaction to the bombing itself. And so I didn't sit down and think through a plan or, you wish you would have, especially after you go through something like this, which is very unique. Most people don't. And I hadn't been there before. So I really got an education on many things. And so, You know, this case was real high profile, obviously. And when you had an elected official like I did step up, and I had a press conference in June, I think it was June 30th of that year. And I had General Parton was at the press conference. This was at the state capitol. Galen Windsor, who was one of the inventors of the atomic bomb and worked on the Manhattan Project. Ted Gunderson, a longtime career FBI, not just agent, but he ran at least two offices, bigger offices like LA and Houston, I believe the other one was, in his career. And then had, see like somebody I'm forgetting off the top of my head, but we had some heavy hitters there.
We had somebody who had to be interviewed in LA because they couldn't make the
Yes,
flight.
we were supposed to have Sam Cohen, who you're referring to, who was the inventor of the neutron bomb. He couldn't get out of LA because the Unabomber was causing troubles and they shut everything down. And so what happened was the local here in Oklahoma City, the local NBC affiliate contacted the NBC affiliate in LA, and they interviewed him, and they ran that interview all weekend. I mean, just kept running it over and over and over again. And it became a bigger deal. So Sam Cohen was part of that too. So you think about these people that you have in this press conference, they're super heavy hitters. They know what they're talking about. And General Parton, as you know, and we have his report that I'm getting ready to refer to in our report. He let us include it in our report. He did a similar thing. It was an organic reaction. He watched what was going on the TV the day of, and as the days went by, and he put together his own report on explaining why the government's proposal that it was an ammonium nitrate bomb inside that truck outside that did all the damage to the building. He goes into great detail and explains in a scientific way why that could not be, and that it was not. It had to have other explosive devices to do that much damage inside the building, intentionally placed on header beams and or columns, which when you look into it, you find out that is the truth. So he also had an attorney up there in the DC area that I've come to be friends with. That's a constitutional attorney. And he contacted me. And anyway, we started talking with General Parton, and he came to Oklahoma City. One thing led to another. So, yeah, that's how that happened.
Now, one major issue, though, is I don't know if we'll ever be able to figure out specifically what may or may not have used, if it was AMPHO alone, if there was munitions laying around, or what it might have been, because I don't know if that building was up even an entire month before they did a controlled implosion, and from what I understand, removed all material to essentially classified dumps.
Yeah, they put the material in dumps in the metro area here and guarded it, wouldn't let anyone come in and, get into it.
So there, a lot of these things, like what you said and what he did, I mean, I know there's chemical signatures and things like that are, come out of different explosives and etc. But if you don't have the material to test, then it's going to kind of forever be speculation. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yeah. And so, and I was like most people in terms of listening to what was going on and watching and hearing that it was an ammonium nitrate bomb, estimated to be various sizes. It grew and changed over time. And I just accepted that, like you kind of introduced yourself, accepting what happened. And because I did not have an interest in science and a background in science and things like that in my life, that I would have known better. So somebody like General Parton and many others really opened my eyes in those early days that, hey, it doesn't matter. Like Sam Cohen said, it doesn't matter how much ammonium nitrate you have in the back of that truck. And even when they changed at one point, they said, well, we found out it probably wasn't diesel. It was jet fuel. To supposedly, that sounds like it's going to charge it up or jack it up a bunch more.
That doesn't sound actually the jet fuel thing.
Yeah.
I was in the Army back at the time, and we actually used, I forgot the name for it, but we used a particular kind of diesel that was also used in jets for our vehicles that we're driving around. It's like a MP4 or something like that. So I don't know if it might have been the same thing, but with Timothy McVeigh being a vet, um, and Terry Nichols and Fortier, it would make sense that they could try to obtain a fuel that they would have been, comfortable with already, that was being used for deuce and a halves and tanks and what have you. So I don't know if that's the case, but it did pop in my mind.
Well, my thinking is, after everything I've learned, not just in this case, but many things since then, is I think they did that just to try to make it look like, oh, that bomb did and could have done that damage, because people were starting to raise questions about it. And, it just couldn't have done that damage. And so that's the real important part of this. If it didn't, then what did happen? How did it happen?
Well, I have a question for you because supposedly they were doing I don't know who it was, but somebody has seismographs that did pick up the event of the day.
No, it was it was Oklahoma University. We had seismographs in several locations, one not all that far from the Murrah building, and then another one in Norman, which is not all that far either. And so that became a big part of this story, is the seismographs. What do they show? Well, let's put it this way, to try to be accommodating to those that don't want to believe all of this, or the government or whoever. The seismographs, when anybody looks at them, I learned this from the experts. We have our own MIT, he's probably retired now, MIT seismologist there at OU that came out. His name was Ray Brown, and spoke to this. One of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. And he even participated because the feds decided maybe we need to bring somebody in to say why the seismographs can show only one explosion taking place. So I forget that guy's name, but they had somebody that was employed by the federal government, came in, and Ray Brown and this other person and it was put together by the Oklahoma Society of Engineers or someone like that. I forget exactly the organization. And then they didn't have a debate, but they had a presentation that was very well attended. And of course the press covered it real well, to talk about how that could possibly be done by one explosive device. And nobody buys that, what was said there, except people that really, in my opinion, want to believe the government and don't want to be concerned and worried about what a conspiracy and cover-up would require. But, all these years and all these interviews I've done, hundreds of interviews, I've never, and anything that happens with the bombing, people will call me and say, hey, did you hear this? Did you hear that? I've seen a number of other interviews by, quote, experts that somebody brought on radio programs, and they can't explain it. No one's ever really attempted to explain it at all. Nobody's really said, that's an expert, well, here's how it works. And it's because they would lose their credibility. They can't explain it for a truck bomb sitting outside of the Murrah building.
In all the interviews you've ever done, I'm going to ask a question. I have a feeling you haven't been asked it or seen it. Have you ever heard of a natural experiment?
A natural experiment?
Yeah, it's where circumstances place themselves in a manner where you can actually see how something works. Like two cities have similar circumstances over a period of time. One has one thing and the other doesn't. So you can kind of compare the two and say, oh, as an example, Charlotte and Atlanta grew up in about the same time period with the same ability. Atlanta had the Olympics, Charlotte did not. Yeah, because a lot of people say the Olympics put Atlanta on the map, but Charlotte also grew up, and the Olympics may not have had the same effect that they say. Well, you have a natural experiment with the Murrah building. Has anyone looked at the seismology of the controlled explosion and compared it to the initial explosion?
Yeah, they have, as a matter of fact, and they concluded, some did at least, concluded that it did not represent a single event. And this is what other seismologists and experts have said. It represents more than one event, two, possibly three. The government tried to claim that the second event that you see on the seismograms was the building falling down and on the earth and causing that other event. Others that I've talked to, and we talk about it in our report that we created. We have a bunch of experts in there, as I think you know. It just doesn't add up. It can't do it. Not only that, but we also, in the report, this 555-page report that people could get online if they want to and read it themselves. There's even a less expensive mobile type, or what do I call it, the Kindle version, that you can get for a lot less and see these things for yourself. The another explosive device multiple explosive devices had to be placed in that building for that damage to be done. So that's the first cover up and lie part of this, in my opinion.
So does the signature on the April 19th explosion or second explosion match the controlled demolition of a month later? Or
Well, that's a really hard one, but you have, I think, in my testimony is one, I'm a licensed insurance agent and have been in financial services and stocks and stuff like that. And I was in my office with another agent, a good friend of mine, and our secretary. Before the bombing happened, I was getting ready. We were sitting down having a cup of coffee, getting ready to go down to the Capitol. And then it was a small 2-story office building. We're kind of in the middle of it. And we're all sitting there having coffee. We hear this noise go boom, boom, kind of like that. The landlord had told us that they were going to be putting new air conditioning units on the top of that building soon. So as that happened, we all looked at each other and go, wow, what was that? Because it was really strong. We said they must be putting those new air conditioner units on top of the building. And then we just continued to talk. And in just a very short few minutes, my secretary at the Capitol called me and says, hey, are you watching what's going on? Blah, 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 et cetera. And then I rushed to the Capitol. But that was our experience at that moment, how we felt it. We've had so many people, there's just so many people tell the stories of what they heard.
Mhm.
I can't think of anybody that said, no, there was only one event that they heard, the people. But that's not all of it. You've got people in the building that work there that talk about what they heard and experienced. The ones that are most compelling, I think, are ones like VZ Lawton, who was on our bombing committee that we created. He actually survived miraculously, survived the bombing, and many others. A couple of them that were interviewed as they came out of the building survived it. There was a couple of people that said this, and one guy said, well, look, I was I was in California for a long time and had to deal with earthquakes, and we thought it was an earthquake. I got under my desk, and that's what I think saved me. There were targets like that, and that was done by the media. Media captured several of those.
that's
Jane
something.
Graham, I'll mention one more real quick. She's real prominent in this case. She was getting ready to start a computer software program or something on the 9th. I believe it was the 9th floor. It might have been the 8th. And they were just before 9, and people were coming in, and she says, okay, everybody get in your seats. And then the building shook a little bit. And she said, this seemed like an earthquake. Everybody ought to get underneath their desk, or words to that effect. And then the explosion came through the windows about that time, which is an interesting aspect of this, Eric. And I'll just say this last thing is the amount of time I mentioned myself that I could have believed a lot of things because I didn't have the education and training and the sciences required. But when that ammonium nitrate bomb goes off and you're on the 9th floor of this building, it doesn't take 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 seconds or something like that. It doesn't even take 1,000
Right.
to feel that come in and experience it. It's practically, and for the effect of it, it's simultaneous. And that's what happened with VZ Lawton. He was sitting at his desk. One of these pillars was right next to him facing the outside. He was on the 8th floor. And he said he felt the building shake. He was signing some documents. And he said the next thing he knew, boom, he gets hit in the head. He wakes up a little bit later. There's more to that story. But that's how that really works, which was enlightening to me.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And you had mentioned, like reports at the time. Yeah, something I'm starting to discover, and I feel like I need to dig into it even more, is there was a lot of reportage that happened very early, and people were open with what they were saying, different things like that, and reporting things like, "Hey, we got a phone call warning us that something would happen," or this or that, into different publications, and that seemed to kind of like vanish, like around the July August timeframe, almost coincidentally with Kenny Trentadue. Um, an overall narrative seemed to come in and cover everything. Is that a fair statement that it could be worth, really scraping newspapers.com and looking at all of the stories countrywide for the first 2, 3 weeks, even 2 months, just reading every single story, that there's a lot of potential gold in there to mine that has been buried?
Oh yeah. And like, for example, the next day after the bombing, the USA Today newspaper had a big long article like everybody did, and it went into page 2, and who knows, but probably went more pages than that. And they quoted one of our assistant fire chiefs at the time, who's still alive today, saying that, yeah, we got a call like the Friday before telling, and this is all that's been said about that by the 2 or 3 people that have admitted to it. We got a call to be on a high alert that some people could be coming through the city over the weekend, and that we needed to be at a higher alert level. I'll never forget when Glenn Wilbur called me one morning. It was like 10. I for some reason, I remember the time and everything. It was like right at 10. I was driving in my car, get a call, pick it up. It's Glenn, not an unusual call, a common call at that time. We were working closely. And he goes, "Charlie, you're not going to believe what just happened." I said, "What?" He goes, "I just went down to the fire department." He went down there because of this articles in the paper. Glenn was bird dogging this like nobody else was. And people would talk to him because they lost 2 grandsons there.
Right.
And he said, "I went down there, knocked on the door of one assistant, not this man I'm referring to." And he said, "Hey, Glenn Wilbur." And they talk a little bit, talk about how terrible it was and everything. And he goes, "By the way, there was an article in the paper that said so-and-so that you guys had some prior knowledge. Can you tell me about that?" And he stopped, looked down, said he looked back up, and he goes, "No, I don't remember anything like that." "Really? You didn't hear that?" "Nope." Blah, blah, blah. They talk a little bit longer. He leaves, walks down the hall, and finds the other individual and knocks on his door and goes in. And he didn't say, "Hey, I just came from the office of this other guy," or anything. He just said, "I'm Glenn Wilbur," and people knew who he was at that time, and they talk. And he goes, "I understand you guys got a call to be on a higher level of alert, blah, blah, blah." And he said, "Yeah, something like that." And he goes, "Well, you might find it interesting that I was just down to so-and-so's office. He said he didn't know anything about it." And this guy's name is Harvey Weathers. He says, "Well," he goes, "I'm not going to lie for anybody. We got that call." That's exactly how Glenn told me the story. And I have talked to Mr. Weathers even recently. He's still going full speed. And so anyway,
And he maintains it to this day?
yes. Oh, absolutely.
Okay, well, and this kind of lines into the witnesses. I believe your committee, the Oklahoma Bombing Investigation Committee, which was a really interesting mix of people, with journalists, some law enforcement officers, citizenry.
Mhm.
So when I say your committee, I understand you were part of a team and they didn't work for you. You were all working together, which is, awesome. Um, the 24 witnesses, I believe you or the committee somehow spoke to all of these witnesses, or maybe there's more, maybe there's less. I just know of 24. Danny Colson said 24 separate witnesses. We're getting into John Doe number 2. What I've been meaning to ask, when I've asked several people and haven't got a good answers, did anybody give them a photo spread or a lineup at the time? Like,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
of people like Richard Guthrie and Michael Brescia, etc. Great. So did they identify, or did they say, yeah, that's probably them or not them or anything at the time?
Well, and in our report, the very first chapter, I wanted to create it like this. The very first chapter is about the very first thing that happened after they took McVeigh into custody. They discover he's up there in Perry, Oklahoma, which is kind of north central Oklahoma. They go get him. They take him down to central Oklahoma, just west of Oklahoma City. There's a big federal prison there in El Reno, Oklahoma. They took him there, and they had the preliminary hearing, sometimes called a probable cause hearing, for whenever they take anyone into custody like that for a capital crime. Then they will have a preliminary hearing for the government to lay out its evidence to justify holding this person over for trial.
Mhm.
And that's what took place in that. And I think you might be referring to those 24 that were part of that hearing, because that preliminary hearing tells so much right there. Because of all those witnesses that so what was the government's case that they put up to justify holding McVeigh over? It was witnesses, and it was a bunch of them. And they all said, I saw that guy with somebody else. Some of them saw two people with McVeigh.
Right.
And so they didn't have any witness that said, no, there was only one guy. You know, they all said we saw somebody else with him. And that's the common theme with John Doe witnesses throughout this case, whether they're part of that group or some others that were found, because there's a lot of them in Kansas and in Oklahoma City and elsewhere, as that truck made its way to Oklahoma City from Kansas. Right. If that's the truck that actually did the damage.
True. And that's the part that really set me down the rabbit holes, is the 24 witnesses. I understand confusing people, like if you say, oh, 5'8" and they're really 5'10, or they had dark hair but it's really blonde but it's wet that day, blah blah blah, blah. I get that you could misidentify, but to conjure up a second person from nothing, that strains credulity to me, because, and you can confirm this, from what I understand, these witnesses are just people, like people who are delivery drivers, or they work in they get nothing. They don't get paid by the Inquirer. There's no financial incentive. Nobody's giving them any reason or cash or otherwise to come up with second person. Just they're like, yeah, I saw the dude there with somebody else and he bought some cigarettes or something.
Mm-hmm.
Is that fair to say, that they're just normal, everyday?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And many of them that not just were not seeking publicity, but they want to run away from publicity. That's the description of most of these people.
Now, I did ask though early on about the running a photo spread when you went around to talk to them again. Did they confirm any info? Like, did they possibly identify John Doe number 2 out of these? Now, I know it's not admissible in court per se, but as a curious person, I'm just wondering if they said, oh yeah, that really does look like them, if with one of the suspected people. And I threw out a couple names, Richard Lee Guthrie, who's passed away, so that makes it easier to use his name. Peter Lingen, who's now Donna Lingen, there's questions because there's a female and he liked to cross dress, if that he could have been.
Yeah, that was Langen. There's another guy that maybe I'll think of here as we go.
Michael Brescia.
Brescia, that's him. And he was considered to be John Doe number 2, et cetera, et cetera. But I really just go straight to the point here on who done it. I find it hard to believe that those guys did this or participated in it. They may have been aware of it. They may have been planning it with somebody or trying to do something, having some relationship to it. Mm-hmm. I don't think the feds would hesitate in charging those people either, but they obviously didn't do that. And I believe at this point in time, it's because Brescia and some of these other ones were playing both sides, and the government knew it. And they were just insiders giving them information. So that could have been outed. That's part of the problem with the feds in the bombing case is sure. If you follow this John Doe trail, you're going to find some government agents in there.
Well, Peter Langen was a Secret Service informant.
Yep.
For one. And Elohim City is nicknamed Alphabet City by some people, because they seem to have an informant there from everywhere. You had Carol Howe, ATF, Peter Langan. Jim Matthews was an informant, for God's sake. Strassmeyer, we don't know who he was informing for, but he seems to have a really interesting background that everyone's still trying to figure out.
I think Strassmeyer was informing for our own government. I think he was
Possible.
here with their knowledge. That's why they never questioned him. They never brought him into our state grand jury. They never brought him into the federal case. And there's so much more. There's a reason for that, which I don't mind going into. But as we know, this case is very, very deep and wide.
Sure.
But Strassmeyer, there's no question in my mind, he was here just to infiltrate these domestic groups. I know we may be running, I don't know how much time we've got left, Eric, but I've thought about this story and I want to tell this because I didn't tell it for a very long time. You may be aware of it because I know you've looked into the case a lot and done a lot of pieces already on it. But I'll tell this story as quickly as I can. I had so many people reaching out to me they would reach out to me at my Capitol office.
Sure.
And I had a lot of people that just show up, just a ton. And so the two legislative assistants I had over that period of time, we got to where we had a lot of people that were just being redundant with basic information. And then we had a few, that people will call crazies or whatever you want to call them. And then I had some that I'm convinced were sent in by the feds to try to get me off on some track. But so this woman leaves a printed piece of paper, like it came off a computer, with things on it 2 or 3 times. And she signed her name as Dove, D-O-V-E. So I come in after lunch and I find that, and I turned around to my secretary at the time. I said, "Hey, have you ever seen this lady?" She goes, "Yeah, I saw her one time when I was coming back from lunch. She slid something under the door and walked off." And I said, "Well, be sure to tell her like the other ones," because she was saying some things that sounded credible and things that I wanted to hear about. And that's to tell her, I can't use any information she has unless I can talk to her and verify things. Okay, well, funny that she came back not too long after that. And this LA talked to her. She set up a meeting. I had a meeting with her. She was a middle-aged, probably 40-something registered nurse, a very competent person. The long and short of it, she said, "I get this information that I've got comes from my brother who works for one of our congressmen, James Inhofe, who became a U.S. Senator. A lot of people know him. He was around for a long time." I said, "Oh, really?" She goes, "Yeah, we have some family family get-togethers where we get together for birthdays or holidays, and we'll talk about stuff. And he tells us some interesting things from time to time." And so I said, "Would you see if he would let me come and talk to him?" And I thought, that'll never happen. And that'll never happen. It did happen. And I went down there actually with Roger Charles. He was with me. And this individual wouldn't let Roger come in and be part of the interview. He says, "No, Representative Key, only you come in." And I was trying to record that. I started trying to record some of these conversations I was having.
Mm-hmm.
And I walked in there with a kind of a micro recorder I didn't tell this guy. Probably was the first one or one of the first ones I did. I was embarrassed about it. And as we came in and sat down, he looked at me and goes, "Before we get started, Representative Key, are you recording this?" And I thought, "Oh, great." And I said, "Yeah, I am." And he says, "I would appreciate it if you'd not do that." So I took that out of my pocket, laid it down, turned it off. And then we had this conversation, which included a lot more than I'm going to tell you right now. But the real important part is he said, "I had a meeting," which I have frequently, with government officials from all kinds of agencies. He said, "At this time I was talking with and having a meeting with an assistant DOJ person and an assistant ATF, way up, pretty high up there on the ladder. And they're talking about the bombing." And he said, "Well, ask him a question, what happened or whatever." And they said, "Look, the genesis of the Oklahoma City bombing was a fake sting operation that was begun to be put together right after Waco because the ATF looked so bad. So they were putting together a fake sting operation that would make them look good. Like, look what we stopped. Look what we did." And I asked him at that time, I said, "Is that how they said it exactly?" He goes, "That's exactly how they said it. The genesis of the bombing was a fake sting operation that was put together to make the ATF look good."
Now, I'm confused about that. And I've heard you mention it before, but the term fake sting, I've always thought of this as a failed sting. The difference being that they actually planned to capture McVeigh or whoever was driving the truck or whatever, swooping in at the Hollywood moment that, blah, 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 truck goes in, they swoop all around. They're like, busted, busted, busted. And then they open the back. Oh my God, there's the bombs. And there was some evidence that could support that, like the U.S. Air Force bomb disposal unit being in the area at the time. I believe Jesse Trentadue came up with that, or somebody did. But fake is kind of confusing to me versus failed. Am I completely off base?
Well, and this is a problem with cover-ups is they cover it up so you don't know all the answers. And that's one thing that was so frustrating for me and us, because I was asked just all the time. I was in the news the first couple of years all the time. Everybody knew who I was in Oklahoma.
Sure.
And so your question again was what exactly?
Well, my question is, could he have meant failed versus fake? Because a failed sting operation, like, let's say, play out the theory that they got Timothy McVeigh, some dummy out there, blah, 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 whatever. They have these people. And then he rolls in the truck, and then ATF surrounds the truck. He's busted on the ground, everything. They open the back and, oh my God, look at all that info. Headlines come in. You've got a movie moment. I always thought that that's what they were going for. And it was Strassmeyer, as a matter of fact. And I talked to Kirk Lyons, his lawyer too, who said something about the dumbass didn't know how, had too tall of a truck and couldn't drive it into the parking area. So he drove around the front of the building and then blew it up. That I don't know, for sure, but that was kind of what he was saying as a possibility. But the failed sting operation does make a lot of sense in my mind. But when I hear fake, then I don't know what a fake sting operation is. But how would that?
Yeah, and here's what I think, Eric, is actually, they did mean, I took it that way, and they had to mean it was a fake sting operation because it was created so early before the bomb. We didn't know about the question you're asking too. And it's later on that I became very convinced, and I am convinced what I'm getting ready to say now. Probably haven't said this maybe more than one or two times in a recorded interview, but I believe that McVeigh was probably working with them. And that was a fake sting operation, not a failed one, a fake one to make them look good, just like they were saying. And they didn't expect it to happen. And some other evidences that don't prove this, because we can't prove it. If we could prove it, we'd be out there with it a long time ago. But I think, the rest of it is that you've got the problem with Strassmeyer. Gosh, there's so much here I'm thinking about. You got the problem with Strassmeyer. Strassmeyer was pushing this really hard. And when you look at his background, who his family was, he was pushing among those, radicals. Some of them no doubt were, and alleged radicals. I think a lot of them were just people that were kind of caught up in the Elohim City and hanging out with some of those people. But he was pushing it, and he was telling those people, quote, I remember this well, I'll never forget it, of course. We have to take our war against the government to a higher level and assassinate politicians, create public mass shootings, and blow up government buildings, end quote. That's in the government's own reports, the ATF's own reports. We have it in our 555-page report on the bombing. So Strassmeyer's pushing that. And you have these other issues that add.
So you think he was an agent provocateur?
No question in my mind about Strassmeyer. And then you have the evidences for McVeigh would be, there are stories that came out back then, right after the bombing, not too long afterwards, in which McVeigh allegedly told his sister, whatever the Boston paper is, and a number of others felt like it was credible enough. They wrote articles about this. So we're not just making this up that somebody told us. Said that McVeigh didn't actually leave the military. He was continuing to work for the federal government. And he told his family that he was going to be part of some, I just call it very generally and generically, some covert government and or military operation to go take out drug lords or drug dealers or whatever, assassinate people. And when we saw that a long time ago, you thought, what is that? But
You
since,
mentioned the major a lot, I think, as part of that, correct?
I'm
Or
sorry,
he's the major. He said that he was working for the major.
yeah, the major. And then you have Wendy Painting, who's written a book on the bombing. She went down to the archives in Austin that the defense lawyer, Stephen Jones, gave to the University of Texas. And there are documents in there where McVeigh had told the very first lawyers that he was, again, words to the effect that you just stated, that he was working for the government still. And that's in the official records too. So
Right. And then he was surprised by how large the explosion actually was. I think his very, very, very first lawyers, he had told something like that too. And that's where a lot of this gets confusing. And I actually am talking with Wendy Painting as well. But part of the confusion with this whole mess is Timothy McVeigh, who kind of has told like 20 stories. Depending on the day, he tells a different, or told a different story, which added a lot of confusion. And I totally agree. I feel like early on, a lot of information is there that's kind of been overlooked. And that's why I had mentioned looking up early articles. Now, I wanted to circle back around because you had said something in an interview that floored me. And I know I'm harping on the 24 witnesses, but I think that's so incredibly important. But you had mentioned, and it's hard to believe that I've got to ask this, but that the body shop witnesses, I think it's Elliott's, where the Ryder truck was rented, that the FBI was requesting to hypnotize the witnesses there.
and they
Can
actually
you
did. One of
please
them.
tell us what happened, or what that was all? Because this is a major, major, major point here, because hypnosis can not only extract but can also induce.
Yeah, and so the three individuals that are the subjects here of this story is Eldon Elliott, who owned Elliott's Body Shop and Ryder rental truck business. His manager, a lady named Connie Beamer, and then a third person happened to be in that little small office named, I might think of his in a minute, it's not that important, but he was one of the mechanics that worked there. And he was taking a break or lunch break at the time that McVeigh and the John Doe came in. And so all during the course of the FBI investigating this, and in this particular location, they had talked to Eldon Elliott and Connie Beamer multiple times. They stuck with their story, and they said they kept hammering them. Like one of them said, and maybe both of them said it, that they felt like the FBI was trying to get them to change their story or say things a certain way. So then they came up and they decided that this was a point in time where a really big red flag went off in my mind, where I'm 100% convinced they are trying to spin this thing off. It came super clear to me at the time. And so they said, would you guys go under hypnosis? Well, Connie and Eldon said, absolutely not. That's a bunch of baloney, and we're not going to do it. We know what we saw, and that's it, period. And the other guy, they got him to go under hypnosis. All he was doing was having a lunch break or something, and he didn't do the transaction or anything. Eldon and Connie Beamer actually did all the paperwork transaction with McVeigh and the other person. So they spent some good time with them there, interfacing with them. So they got this other guy to do the interview, and then they came out the next day after they had done that, and it was a big headline and everything. You go back and look at the history of this. Big headline, FBI figures out who the John Doe was. It was a mistake by Connie Beamer and Eldon and the other person, of somebody that came in the day before with someone, and that McVeigh really came in by himself. And they did all that with everything I just told you just now. No exaggeration, no anything. They changed it to that. They were trying to turn the page, the chapter, and go on somewhere else. There's no more John Doe.
See, I find that highly, highly suspect, because the use of hypnosis in investigations, which, is obviously controversial, um, usually takes place with somebody who is a victim or whomever who has trouble remembering something. Like they saw somebody, but they just don't remember, and the hypnosis is to fill in the details. What you're describing is two witnesses. They were saying, no, it's this guy here. We talked to them, very clear and precise, and remembering very clearly who they saw. So that seems to like be an odd approach. If people are very comfortable and certain of what they saw, why would you have to hypnotize them?
Yep. And you already had so many witnesses. I'll tell a couple of quick stories real quick. You had Rodney Johnson, who is supposed to be the very first witness that contacted the FBI without being influenced by any media coverage or anything. He contacted that morning because he's the guy that had that great big van with those big doors on the side, catering van. He was actually a paramedic, but he had gone off on a personal self-employed venture to run this truck. And he was coming down slowly right in front of the Murrah building. And there was the Ryder truck sitting there. And he said, I pulled up and I was kind of going up and I saw this Ryder truck sitting there like it was, and it kind of ticked him off. What are they doing? They're kind of in the way. So and just as he was going forward, a person walks in front of his vehicle. It's McVeigh. This guy is gay. And so I'm going to tell the rest of the story. He told the FBI, he goes, yeah, I saw him. And I noticed him because I thought he was good looking and, was really getting into him and watched him walk across in front of the vehicle going north across the street to that parking lot right there in front of the Journal Record building. And he watched him go across, had the door open. He could see him walk. And then he took off. He was lucky, this Rodney Johnson, that the light, which was right there in front of him, pretty close, that it was green, or he would have sat there when the bomb went off and maybe not lived through it. But he contacted the FBI. They said, we're going to use you in the trial for sure, definitely, all this stuff. And they never did. And he was really ticked off, like a lot of people were that saw McVeigh with somebody else. And they said, oh, yeah, we're going to use you. And then they didn't use him in the trial. They only used one witness in the trial. And it was actually more of a victim as much as a witness, Dana Bradley, a lady that was in the Social Security office and could see the window of the Murrah building where the Ryder truck pulled up in front of it. And she saw that happen. And she saw this was being on the passenger side that she's observing. She sees John Doe get out, walk towards the back, do something that she wasn't paying that much attention to, and maybe opened the back of it or did something, and then walked on to the front and then walked out of her field of vision. And then the explosive devices went off. She was trapped in there. Interesting part of her story. And some big header beams or other concrete had fell on her leg. She's the one that had to cut her leg off to get her out of there. And so that's the only person that was in trial in Denver at the federal trials to speak to another John Doe.
But she did testify there was a second person.
Yep, she did. And so, the federal
was she a
government,
defense witness?
No, she was a federal government witness. And see, you had to place somebody at the scene of the crime. Maybe there's cases where you don't have to, but you really have to place the perpetrator at the scene of the crime. And that's what they were having to do. That's why they did that, because they couldn't, they couldn't move forward and put him there any other way.
And that didn't raise any eyebrows. I mean, I find it peculiar because from what I understand, you can correct me if I'm wrong, there was no witness of Timothy McVeigh alone. Every witness who saw him with somebody else.
Eric, there could be somebody, but the great overwhelming majority saw him with somebody else.
Which is peculiar. And that leads us to another question. Like, they wouldn't have even needed a witness if they could just play the videotape of him getting out of the vehicle.
There's so many. Here's a couple other eyewitness accounts, and they probably are about the same time that they occurred. There's a man named Paul Heath, who was the head of the Veterans Department there in the Murrah building. And they didn't have a secretary in that office, but he tells the stories, told it over and over again. He said, some people walked into my office. They said it was either the Friday before the bombing or that Friday before that one. And he said they walk in and they have one of these little bells that you hit with your fingers and it dings to alert somebody. And somebody ring that bell. He came out and he goes, "Hi." He said, "There's 3 people out there. One of them is McVeigh and 2 other guys." And he goes, "Hi, how can I help you guys?" And he said he would have they would have veterans come into that office, you know, somewhat frequently, and they're looking for work primarily or other stuff. And he goes in and says, "Can I help you?" And McVeigh did all the talking. And McVeigh said, "Yeah, we're veterans. We're looking for work." Some words to that effect. He goes, "Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Dr. Paul Heath." And McVeigh said, "Timothy McVeigh." And Heath says, "Oh," he goes, "McVeigh, are you related to the McVeighs down in so-and-so, some town in South Oklahoma?" And he goes, "Well, how do they spell their name, Dr. Heath?" This is Tim McVeigh saying this. And he goes, "McVey." And McVeigh said, "Oh, no, Dr. Heath, remember this. My name's spelled McVeigh." And Heath says, "Oh, okay. Well, you missed a really good family there. They're really good people." And he goes, "Oh, no, Dr. Heath, I had a great family growing up, blah, blah, blah." Then they start talking about work or stuff like that. The other 2 people are just sitting there in that little waiting area, kind of hanging out. One of them sat down, one of them stood up, and he never interfaces with them. Probably about the same time, you have 3 or 4 people come in to the Oklahoma Gas and Electric downtown office, their main office down there. And they have an area where you come in and pay your bills if you want to. So you had an Oklahoma City off-duty police officer that was in there regularly that they hire, like a lot of companies do, to be security. He says, this guy's name is Melvin Bell. We've got affidavit. All this stuff's in our report. He says McVeigh and Jennifer McVeigh, and then the what's the other couple that got off? Michael, what's his
Party.
Yeah. He and another female came in, and he didn't know who they were, but they came in and they said, "Hey, we're looking for the Murrah Federal Building." And they go, "Oh, you're right here real close. It's just right there around the corner," and blah, blah, blah. Then they have some other small talk and they go on. So you had, what was that all about? You know, what's going on there? Are they casing the place out? Are they all part of it?
Didn't Timothy McVeigh also talk to the daycare person asking odd questions, like he was going to have his kid in the daycare or something, but really asking weird things about the security and whatnot for the daycare center?
You know, I'm not 100% sure on that one, Eric. There's been a lot of things that have been put on the internet that I see no evidence for. I don't even see a story to connect it. And this stuff happens, as you know. So that could have happened and somehow I've forgotten it because it's been 30 years. That's why we made this report, because we knew we'd forget stuff.
Sure. No, that's fine. Okay. So I want to do a seismic shift, which is, I guess, definitely a pun, but I want to talk about another part that's been bothering me a lot. And that's how Terry Nichols was in the same suburbs in the Philippines at the same time as Ramzi Youssef and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed.
Yeah.
And you have said something in an interview, and something I've actually been saying on the side too. There's an old Arab quotation, which is, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." And I can't help but wonder when I read things like how Terry Nichols is showing up and having gold bullion and things like that, if maybe some of the funding wasn't just the ARA, like perhaps because let's just say that there was an element from the Middle East that definitely did not like us very much. And it would seem possible, and you could tell me if I'm completely off base, but it would seem very possible that, well, you could send your own people in, but if there's already a bunch of really angry people in that area, why not fund them? Why not give them a little bit of cash? You're going to get the same result, and they have an easier time moving around. Do you think it's possible that there could have been both, a domestic terrorist element and a Middle Eastern element, if you will.
Yes, I believe it's possible, and I think it's probably the case with this case. And I'll mention the Kerry Gagan story. Kerry Gagan is a guy that came forward and said that he was being recruited to participate in this bombing or a bombing at the time, and he was a small-time crook. I would characterize him that way, and he didn't want to be caught up in that. So here's the deal. Kerry Gagan out of Denver, Colorado area, he had been a guy that had done some small-time stuff, like I think some drug things, and he also had been, I think, convicted for something along the lines of going into a business and faking that he fell on a slip floor, and then he sues the business and blah, blah, blah. He'd do stuff like that. So his story is this, and his story is this. He said, I was approached by people who were saying they wanted me to go case out a building or two, like in Omaha and Oklahoma City, and maybe somewhere else. I'm forgetting, Kansas City, I think, maybe Houston. And that then they wanted him to transport certain materials here or there. And he then realized what was actually going on, or had thought about it enough that he didn't want to be part of a bombing. That's, spent a lot of time in jail for that. And he went to the Department of Justice office in Denver. And he said, look, here's what's going on. I'm interfacing with these people, which included both white Americans and dark complected Americans. And he says, I don't want to have anything to do with it. I'm just letting you know right now, I'm not participating in that. They heard all this information. They wrote him a letter of immunity. They didn't just do this in this order. They said, well, look, we want you to continue to meet with these people and report back to us. He didn't want to do that. They said, yeah, you're going to do it. And we're going to give you a letter of immunity from this to do that. The letter of immunity is in our report. If people wanted to go see that, it's in there. So this guy did this 5.5 months before the Oklahoma City bombing. He went to the Justice Department in Denver, got this letter, told them this story. So he would have had to dream this up and gotten lucky enough to dream this up, in 5 or 6 months before it actually happened. Part of the rest of his story is that he had met with or been in some kind of a meeting with other people in which he described individuals that he said he did not know. One was dark complected. Another one was a white person that he said could have been Terry Nichols, but I don't think he ever said really that it was Terry Nichols. But think about that. You've got that story. How does that fit in? Not to mention VZ Lawton's own story, who was part of our bombing committee. He was in the building. He, lucky he didn't die. He got real angry. He was actually part of the survivors group, which there was some of those survivors gravitated towards the federal government.
Mhm.
In my opinion, I think they used them in a way to counter what we were doing.
Mhm.
Well, so that's, you've got too many anomalies here, and you can't just explain them off as, strange occurrences. They're connected. And what they exactly mean is what we don't know. But I've come to believe that it was like Jim Inhofe's staffer. They started putting together a fake sting operation to make them look good, because after Ruby Ridge and Waco, they almost got eliminated, absorbed into another agency, as people that have looked into this know. And so they were trying to save themselves and their jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's no doubt in my mind that this was part of the deal. This was something that was planned. It wasn't a quick fix, a quick project they put together. I think there was a lot of planning, and there was probably some other things that were done by some parties, whoever they were. Is it the government? Some people working on their behalf, or maybe it was some of the bad guys they were using that were part of this that maybe didn't know it. But I think there were probably more than one Ryder truck. John Cash, JD Cash, believed that himself. I think Glenn had come to believe that, and other things that really tell a bigger piece of this story, I think. Anyway, I'll stop there and let you pick it up.
No, Project Bojinka.
Yeah, probably. I'm sorry, I got off. I knew I was forgetting something. That likewise has been the very big deal to me, because when I first saw that, I knew some things related to it in terms of terrorists. But when I saw right after 9/11, I'll never forget it. My wife, I was getting ready to go to the Capitol. I was still at the house. My wife could just say, "Hey, come here, look at this on the TV. 9/11 happened." And I thought, well, I remembered it reminded me one time when some reporters were saying, "Key, why do you keep doing this? Why don't you just let it go? And you keep hounding this." And it just kind of came out naturally. I said, well, look, if we don't hold government accountable and have some oversights over what they do, things like this will happen again. Kathleen Rowley was the FBI agent. As I recall, she was not just an agent, she was the head of that office, which was in Minneapolis, St. Paul.
Mhm.
She took it upon herself to do a press conference saying, hey, we were tracking some of these guys that are accused of doing 9/11 when they were taking airplane flight training or whatever else they were doing. And we found out about this laptop that was confiscated in Manila with Project Bojinka on it. And we wanted to get that information. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but she said we sent messages up the ladder to the higher ups in DC, in the FBI and DOJ, and said, please let us have access to this. We need it, blah, blah, blah. Nothing. They would not let them have access to the Project Bojinka, which who knows, maybe would have stopped 9/11 from happening.
Wow.
But that Project Bojinka is a part of this. And that's why the Congress needs to look into the Oklahoma City bombing. I believe they should look into this, because it's like some of the things we've seen in recent times, but it was 30 years ago. And I've come to learn there's other cases like that out there where, for whatever reason, they didn't really get or go after the wrongdoers, and they cover things up.
PATCON, Arctic Frost, different operations that are potentially tying these things together. Absolutely. I wanted to shift one more time, because I think you personally got involved with some of the investigation with Terrence Yeakey, the officer who lost his life under kind of mysterious circumstances. There's what they claim and then what is real. Can you break that down? Because I think you actually went to the location, looked around and everything else, and can maybe illuminate things a little bit.
There's no question that Yeakey was killed. There's no question about it. The why is the big question. Back to cases like this, if you don't know the answer to things, you can't speak to it. And then if there are those that are trying to cover things up, then they can point the finger at you and ridicule you and call you a conspiracy theorist and stuff like that. So there's a lot of connects to this. I'll just try to get down to the raw part of it. But there were people that were doing things related to the bombing that were trying to address the emotional impact that it had on people that were there or that lost loved ones, et cetera, et cetera. And there was a lady named Ramona McDonald, who was working with another group of people that created the book, which is called, I think it was called Angels Over America or something like that.
Angels Over Oklahoma City.
Oklahoma City. It was a pictorial. And so she knew a lot of people. She knew Terry Yeakey. And that's how I initially got connected and knew about him. I never met him before he died. I never met him when he was alive. And so the thing is Terry was allegedly, I never found anything that made a real strong, absolute connection to him looking into the bombing himself. It was eyewitness testimony and other people that knew him that said he was doing that. I have no doubts that he was. I have no doubts about that. Mm-hmm. But what happened was Terry was found west of, actually just about a mile or so west of that El Reno Federal Penitentiary where they took McVeigh to in that first few days. It was out there. You can imagine Kansas and Oklahoma, a lot of Western Oklahoma was like this flat wheat field kind of property, and he's out there and you've got these 2-lane roads, or paved or not paved, barbed wire fence on both sides. And then every so often you'll have a creek run through, and then there'll be a culvert down there, a little small bridge. Well, they claim that Terry committed suicide. He pulled up one of those roads out in the middle of nowhere, and he got out of his truck. got out of his vehicle, and before he got out, they say he cut his wrist and then got out and walked through he's a big man, by the way. I'm 5'6", by the way. I think he was 6'1" or 2" or something like that. He goes through the barbed wire fence, walks down, which is not very far, just a little bit down the road, slightly, a creek. He goes back through the barbed wire fence and goes through the culvert, which a big man, a shorter man like me would have to bend down to go through those culverts. They were big culverts, but I'd have to bend down. Goes through the other side, goes through another barbed wire fence, and then walks about 3/4 of a mile following that creek, and decides he's not going to die, and then he shoots himself with his handgun.
Now, also, from what I recall, he was actually anemic as well. So
I may have, if I knew that, I've forgotten it. I don't recall that right now.
Okay, I'd have to look into it, but which adds another question about, if he's anemic and losing blood, that would be a very difficult task to do all of that.
Well, but you've also got the cuts, and you've got whether or not he could actually do that. Can you actually cut yourself? There was a lot of blood in the floor pan of the car. Can you do that? Go through the fence, you go through all that, walk practically a mile away, and then I guess you could, but I mean, the chances aren't very good, in my opinion. The real thing is, I talked to police officers who knew him personally, very close. Every one I talked to, including family, including his ex-wife, who they were in the process of getting a divorce, which somebody could say, well, maybe he was depressed about that. No, everybody says no. He had 2 little girls, that he was a great father. He loved those girls. They said he would never do that. He would never do that to his girls, or do that period. So I think he was murdered, and, it's part of the story.
Wow. Now, to wrap things up, because this is such a giant rabbit hole, I do like to always ask this question, which is essentially 2 variants. Either, what is the one question I should have asked you, but I neglected to? Or if not that, what is one question you've been waiting through all these interviews, all these years, for somebody to actually ask you?
No, I wish you would have asked me that before, so I could put some thought into it, because I'm not sure what ends up happening in an interview like this. Is I've got all these stories. I tried to throw out as many as I could, and evidences, and I think I've run through most of those. I'll tell you this. As we hired several investigators. We were fortunate to have people that had the means to provide us with the funds to be able to do what we did. And we were real fortunate for that. And so as we went through that whole process, one area, we had this information coming at us like a fire hose. So I started breaking it up into different categories. And one of them was the science, the building, the explosive devices. That's one category. We could call it the science, which we did a lot. I didn't have the background in that area, so I always thought that's going to be hard to convince people of. Even though when one hears it and hears the experts, et cetera, I don't think anybody can come away without believing that, there were multiple explosions, et cetera, or at least push you in that direction. But the problem is that it takes some knowledge. And so I thought the science would not be that important, but it's actually turned out to be some think it's the most provable part of the story. And I think that may be the case. It could very well be, because the science itself shows that there's no way that an ammonium nitrate bomb, just like Sam Cohen, the inventor of the neutron bomb, said, it doesn't matter how much ammonium nitrate you put out in front of that thing. And even if you put, quote, jet fuel in it, you're not going to do the damage that was done to that building. And so to me, that's one of the biggest smoking guns to prove there's much more to this. Obviously, you have to get rid of the John Does and some of this other information they've tried to get rid of, because if you follow any of these paths, as a matter of fact, in our report, we got tons of stuff in there. We've got more ATF reports that refer to informants inside Elohim City. Probably was Strassmeyer, but more than one. Here's another story. When the ATF and FBI were kind of feuding with each other back then. And so at one point, the ATF approached the Oklahoma Highway Patrol. They have an airplane that they use in our state. And they said, we'd like to use your airplane and your pilot to fly over Elohim City, take some pictures, prepare to bring some charges against these people. This is prior to the bombing. And so they get in there and they fly out. You know, it's about a 2-hour car drive from Oklahoma City to the east part of the state. And they go out and they put all that together. And this is in one of these ATF reports in our book. They say, as they're talking, these agents and the pilot for the Highway Patrol, they're talking about different things. And the pilot speaks up and says, well, you know, the FBI's got their own informants in there, meaning Elohim City, don't you? And they go, what? No, we didn't know anything about that. So part of the story is that, you know, you had both agencies with undercover people that are embedded in some of this organization and others, as I found out. And they a lot of times don't know. One agency doesn't know what the right hand doesn't know what the left's doing, kind of a thing. So they had enough information to know things that were going on, but they obviously chose not to take action before it took place because they could have.
Wow. Well, Charles, thank you so much for your work on this. And the final report, I'm going to have a link to that on Amazon in the description so people can check it out. And hopefully by continuing to talk with you and other people, maybe we can come to some kind of conclusion, or maybe, you know, we'll put it out there. Maybe Congress might consider picking this up. They've got a committee talking about the JFK files, UAP. This seems to be something that really could be explored by Anna Paulina Luna and her people or whatever. I would love to see some sort of traction on it. So, Charles,
Well,
thank you.
maybe people, I appreciate that. Maybe people listening to this will call their congressman and U.S. senator and say, hey, look at this Oklahoma City bombing and give some of these people justice that had that happen to them in Oklahoma City. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous what we put up with and what we get put through a lot of times. And thanks for having me on. I appreciate you covering this subject. It's very important to a lot of people.
Thank you, sir.